Yeah, so smile and wave, and let's get our intro. Hello. So I'm going to start with the question, what do you think is funny? Because what we think is funny is really influenced by culture and so many things. And we're going to find out today how that works with my guest, Jess Mitolo. Jess has taught comedy and taught comedians improv in the US, but also in 12 different countries around the world. And so we're so excited to hear from Jess. She's taught with both the Second City and independently. And hello, how are you?
I'm so great. Thank you so much for letting me be here today.
Oh, I am thrilled. And I don't know if you would call this full disclosure, but I know Jess because I took her improv and comedy writing class at the Second City a couple of years ago and had the experience of getting called on stage at the Second City. So I know that your process is spot on. Like I was so well prepared. I was what I thought makes sense. So, say that again.
I said, that's my favorite thing to hear. That's the dream, is that you get called on stage and you're like, I knew exactly what to do. Thank you so much.
Down to, I think I told you, you said never wear your coat on stage because you'll get hot. You'll take it off and you'll leave it. I got hot on stage. I took it off. And then that voice in my head was, oh, don't forget your coat. Jess said, don't forget your coat.
I feel like many pieces of clothing have been left behind on stage. And then you're like, oh no. And then I go back and get my shoes. Why did I take off my shoes? I shouldn't have done that. And then the next 3 scenes, you're just thinking like, how did my shoes end up on the bar or the stage floor?
That is funny. Well, this thing that we could be so prepared for what improv is like. I thought for context, why don't you talk for a second about training comedians or teaching improv in a US context before we take it abroad. So what is that process when you're teaching?
Yeah, so the very first thing that I always say, as human beings, we tend to feel our best, our most funny when we're with our friends and family. So when people come to an improv class, normally they're like, all my friends and family tell me I'm so funny. What can I do? And really the muscle that we're training is telling you how you can cultivate all of those tools that you feel when you're with your friends and family in front of 150 people. So we start just by letting go of all the rules that we feel like we constantly have to live up to that are great for society and like being a functional adult who goes to the bank and pays our bills and like doesn't interrupt people in line, but they hold us back from being our best, most hilarious, vibrant selves. And so in improv, we get to kind of play with all of those voices that are like, I really want to do this. And we get to be like, yeah, do it. So a lot of it at first especially is just unlearning and then getting in touch with all those things that we maybe don't get to practice in our day-to-day lives.
Mm-hmm. What's it like what? When you say a thing you don't get to practice in your day-to-day life, what would that be?
Yeah, like doing what you want. Like having one of my very favorite exercises that we do in the first week of improv is like, yes, let's. And all that it is saying, hey, let's pretend like we're monkeys. And everyone's like, yes, let's. And then immediately jumping in to whatever you said. And it's actually really scary at first to be like, well, if I say something, everyone's going to do it. But what do I want to tell them to do? And learning that it can be as simple as like snapping your fingers or running around the room. And then before you know it, people have kind of exercised all of those muscles. And then you're like standing on chairs, leaving the room and going outside and coming back. So really kind of practicing on a very small scale, what is it that I want to do? And then accepting and supporting and keep getting in touch with that feeling.
Mm-hmm. So the people, when you're teaching here, everyone is for the most part somewhat within the same cultural context. So how does that, and you as well. So talk a little about, so you've taught, I'm going to actually read the list. So you have taught, you've done Second City training programs in Jordan, Romania, and China, but then independent from that, Lebanon, Bratislava, Krakow, Germany, Bulgaria, Hungary, and the Czech Republic.
Yeah.
What happens when you go to teach in another country? Like, is improv even something that happens in some of these other countries? Or are you teaching even what improv is?
You know, I was really lucky that when I decided to do this trip, I was going to Romania, and I was like, oh, if I'm going to be going all the way over to Romania, how can I make the most of that time? And I contacted all of the best improv theaters in that area that I was in. And I was like, I am amazed by what you do. I've been researching you. This is what I do. Is there any way that you want us to work together? So I was really going into pre-established companies and then doing workshops with the people in that community. So I was lucky that everyone already had a base of improvisation, and we were really talking about like, how can we make this, how can we take this to the next level? But the biggest thing, traveling anywhere, is relying more and more on the people in the room, right? Because one person doesn't say what's funny. It's the audience that says what's funny. The more that you go somewhere and you're like, oh, I don't understand that, but everyone laughed. I'm not gonna say I'm the one person who didn't understand that's not funny. I'm like, oh no, everyone loved that. That was great. And really learning to like read the room and respond to that group energy. So being a part of any culture or any country, really relying on like, what do you think? And again, like, I always say the best way to be a better comedian is to laugh more. All of my favorite funny people laugh at everything all the time, and they think everything is so funny and everything becomes a joke. And so really encouraging, one of the biggest things I tell so many of my students is like, I promise you will learn more if you laugh. And then also as a teacher, I'm constantly learning from what the students are laughing at. Because I've been for a long time. People 10 years ago were laughing at very different things than what they're laughing at now. So also being aware of how is comedy shifting?
Well, I was even wondering about that, just the whole idea. By the way, if people are watching live, you can actually put comments and questions, or you can put questions in the comments. So please, and also say hello, because that's how we know who's here. So say hello if you're here. I was going to ask this question at the end, but since you brought it up, I'm going to ask it now. This whole idea, because there's some tense stuff going on in the world right now. And so there's this issue of permission to laugh. You know, you laugh and make a joke and people are like, it's not funny. There's too much serious stuff going on. How do you give yourself permission to laugh? And how does that actually ultimately help maybe with everything that's going on?
Yeah, I always say, we know that something is funny because it's true, and it rings like a very specific place in us where we're like, oh, I never realized that before. Now that you gave me that, now that you showed me that, I can't help but laugh at it. So I think that there is a little bit of a permission to laugh, but also to be really honest about like, well, why isn't that funny? Or why am I not laughing at this? Often it's because it just stopped being as true or as honest as it maybe felt a little while ago. So allowing yourself to really be in that zone and giving yourself permission to listen and to be in the moment to say like, oh, what is that joke saying to me? And why do I think it's funny? Or even why don't I think it's funny? Which then allows me to better identify it. Because I think sometimes we get into like good or bad, right or wrong. Yeah. So I say,
well, and Brianna's kind of getting what I was saying too, is how do you not feel guilty about laughing and feeling joy in these times?
Yeah, I think that when I went to Amman, Jordan, the very first time, one of the questions that we asked when we were first sitting down, we were like, what do you laugh at here? And everyone was like, my favorite response, and I think about it all the time, was he was like, things are really hard, and we're like the desert. We like our comedy rough. And I think that there's something, and I was like, oh, I was like, that's very similar, I think, to why we laugh so much, which is that in the hard times, people tend to make the best jokes because it's what we're doing to survive. So I think that there's actually something in knowing that laughter is medicine, and that coming together with a group of people to share those moments results in some of the most important kinds of laughter. And we're not laughing at the victims, and we're not laughing at the issue. We're finding something else. We're finding something that people aren't necessarily talking about, or an underlying truth that affects all of us. So we're never making fun of the tragedy itself.
Or you're not making fun of someone who is the I guess you would say the victim of a tragedy, or someone who's a victim of something. It's the situation itself.
Yeah, we're looking at that with higher institutions. We're looking at that other side of it, or we're looking at how it affects me. So that we're like, oh, I'm acting in this ridiculous way because of this tragedy. Aren't I ridiculous, right? Holding that mirror up to human.
Oh, sure.
And the first person I can always make fun of is myself. So often in those rooms, we're actually looking to be like, look at this thing we all have in common.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that makes sense. And it's hard for someone else to get offended if you're making fun of yourself, right? Yeah. So for the big trip, were all the countries that you visited them, was that one big trip where you actually arranged to go from country to country?
A lot of them were. So I had done
amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Wait, and you just totally did this on your own. You're like, okay, I'm going to go, and you made all these connections and just got this. You set this all up on your own?
Yeah. Well, so I had been, it all kind of worked out perfectly. I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, because I love that idea, because the name of the show is Intercultural Spark. And it's that idea of that and spark inside of you that drives you to make change in your business and make change in the world. And sometimes people sit back and they're like, oh, that didn't happen for me. I have to wait to make it happen. I want to hear how you actually then set up this huge international trip to go teach comedy in all these countries. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it was yeah. Sometimes it's nice to remember those huge things that you do, and you're like, I did do that. That's awesome. It all kind of came together at a really perfect time. It was something that I wanted to do. I had my passport ready, and I had done these like trips. I had gone to Jordan, and I had taught like little workshops in Italy and in London, and I was like, I think this is something I would really love. And so Second City asked me to go to Romania, and they were like, we want you to go teach for a week in Romania, but I teach on an 8-week term. And so they were like, actually though, because you'll spend that middle week in Romania, we would ask that you take that term off. And I was like, oh, well, if I'm not going to be teaching in Chicago for 8 weeks, what am I going to do? And I was like, well, if I'm going to be in Romania, where else can I go? And who else can I see? And I had just participated in the Directors Lab, which was this huge international grouping of 70 directors from all over the world. And I was like, I met so many people, and I started calling them up to be like, can I come?
Oh, interesting. I'm assuming that's something you have to apply for, the Directors Lab. Okay.
Yep. It was, amazing experience. I think they get hundreds of applications, and they really focus on making it a group of people who are just sharing their skills from all over. And it was incredible. It was a life-changing experience, and life-changing in terms of having something that going in and being different and having everyone build off of each other's very unique specialties. So I had met Rafi, who is this improviser in Beirut, and I was like, Rafi, can I come to Beirut? And he was like, yes, come. And I had a Rafika who's in Greece, and I had gone to visit her a couple months before. I was like, can I stop in Athens? He's like, yes, of course. And then I started hearing from all my friends and people who I loved, and then I reached out to all the people I admired. The girl is this.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That you had no relationship with, you just really liked their work.
Yeah, that I was like, because
that's
at the
really
same
cool.
time, I think I was looking for something. I was like, I know this Chicago community so well, and I feel so confident doing this, but I wonder what other people are doing. Like, comedy is it's a big world. And just like you said, comedy in different places must be different. And I was like, I really want to find the people who are doing this in very special ways. And I want to see if I can work with them. So the gorillas in Berlin were doing improv for therapy symposium. And I was like,
it was an improv what therapy? Improv therapy?
Improv, yeah, for therapists. So they were bringing improvisers and therapists from all over the world for this symposium. And I was like, I want to be there for that. And I reached out, and then went to the symposium, and then came back and did a workshop, working with them to do improvised television, which was incredible. And really just kind of filling in the gap. I started like looking at the map and being like, well, if I'm here, what about here? Who do I know from this place? How can I work with them? And before I knew it, had just filled the entire 8+ weeks going from city to city and meeting the most incredible people I've ever met.
So what did you notice as you went from culture to culture? I'm assuming in a lot of places there was a language barrier. What were some of the things you noticed, or did you have a specific process that you followed as you went from country to country? Yeah.
The biggest thing that it took me a little while to realize was how vulnerable someone has. I always know in class when people come and they're improvising, it's a really valuable place to be, right? Like they're really trusting you and they're showing a side of themselves that maybe they don't get to show to their family or to their friends or at work. And they're kind of trusting this room and trusting you. And then when you put in the fact that you're asking people to improvise in English, which is maybe not their first language, it's even more vulnerable. So one of the biggest things that I learned was the importance of slowing down at first and establishing that trust. First things first. And then it's amazing how taking the time to establish trust for the first 20 or 30 minutes of a workshop, all of a sudden by day 5, we're moving so much faster and we're accomplishing incredible things. People are taking these huge chances. But really that importance at the very beginning of just setting the stage and letting us all be ourselves, and immediately allowing for mistakes, right? To be like, I'm going to talk too fast, yell at me. If anything ever happens and you can't find the word in English, say it in your language and I'll catch up to you, right? I'm the teacher. So my job is really to watch what you do and I'll join you rather than you all looking back to me, right? Trust that and I can follow you. And that became really important. Also the idea that so often in comedy, the language and the words are the least important part. There's so many
interesting. Sure.
So there would be so many moments when something would be happening in another language and the interpreter would lean over to be like, this is what's going on. And I was like, I know what's going on. I know.
Just because you could tell from the body language. That's cool.
So that was really powerful to sometimes be like, oh, the translation is almost like keeping you a step behind. If you can just be in the moment of what two actors are experiencing together, you have everything you need.
You know, I'm curious, I'm thinking when you were teaching in China, and I know that was through a Second City program, but different cultures have ideas about being silly and what it means to be silly. And particularly with improv, it's like the bigger you can be and the more silly you can be, the better often the improv is. How does that work in a culture where it's maybe frowned upon to just be silly?
Yeah, it was incredible to go. So I went right from Amman, Jordan, and I took like 2 days to come back to Chicago and then left for China. And I sent everyone a picture that like in Amman, everyone was talking the whole time and everyone was really expressive. And then in China, they were like, what would you like us to do? And they will execute it perfectly. So in China, they were actually so physical. These performers were, and I was working with the professional group. So they were people who, at that theater company were like the teachers and the regular performers. And it was so interesting to watch, to give them the tools to try new things. So I was actually there to teach long form improv and sketch comedy. And the biggest lesson was actually that you had to break down every part of like, what is long form improvisation? What is a sketch? How are we creating it and why? So it was knowing that everyone will be silly, but in order to get to that place of playfulness, we really had to logically break down every step leading up to it. So often when I would find myself being like, there's something that's not working, I had to look inside myself and be like, what did I take for granted? What I think was assumed that isn't being assumed. We were playing with genre and even just culturally, so many of the references, I'd be like, what about blank? And everyone was like, no. And we were doing something with action movies. And I was like, what do we know happens at the end of an action movie? And they were like, the hero dies. And I was like, what? And I was like,
no, he kisses the girl.
Yeah, we're doing things a little differently. So I had to
so interesting.
What assumptions I was making. And so often when I was like, there's something weird, it went back to an assumption I had that I needed to go back and break down something and be a little bit more specific.
That's really cool. Just because when you look at intercultural communications, we come in with so many assumptions and you're working in an opposite situation because improv, we think of in the US, improv as doing what's coming off the top of your head. And what you're saying for improv to work, at least it sounds like that was China, you actually had to give very explicit, detailed instructions, but then they were able to take that and do improv.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. That is so fascinating.
Because so often, again, too, you don't want to give too many rules at the beginning. And you don't want to say, like, the whole idea is you make this your own and to realize, like, wait, I'm not doing anyone a service by doing by teaching this the way I've taught it in the past. I need to make really quick observations. And it was incredible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and Brianna loves how you're looking at this with curiosity instead of judgment, like in terms of what's happening. Not that it sounds like with Brianna, it's not saying like, oh, they're doing it wrong. It doesn't work here. You're saying, I must have assumed something, or I must have done something wrong that's preventing them from actually doing what we're looking to do, which that self-awareness is so important too.
Yes. And I just want to say I'm a huge fan of Brianna. I'm just so happy you're here chiming in for this conversation. Yeah, I think that's really my goal when I walk into any space as a teacher and as a director, is to think, what a gift that these people have chosen to give me an hour of their time, 5 days of their time. Mm-hmm. That's one of we live in such a busy society. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that someone can give you that is more valuable than their time, right? Mm-hmm. And then especially to be like, I'm going to use that time and I'm going to do scary things. So my number one goal is always like, how can I make this person feel as successful as possible? How can I make this work as successful as possible? And what tools do I have that can give someone so that they're not just successful in the moment, but then they know that once I go away, they don't need me to be successful. They have everything that they need to thrive on their own. So that's always kind of not just what are we doing in the moment, but also when I leave, what can you take away and practice and work and keeping this going without me. One of the cool things in China was that I went to, after Beijing, I went to Chengdu just on my own. And some of the students took care of me and they showed me around a whole new city, and I got to sit in on them teaching what I had taught them the week before. And they were then teaching all of their students. So I was like, oh, that's the dream. It's not just to teach something, but then to see how it's getting passed from person to person to person.
And sort of synthesized into their being too. So it's not just, I did this class, now I'm done, but it becomes part of who they are and how they do things.
Yes.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Wait, so what's your origin story? And actually, just because everyone loves love, Brianna says, yes, Deanna, that's exactly what I meant, the self-awareness aspect. So yay. Brianna has one other question too, which I'll do Brianna's other question. And by the way, for people who are watching live, Brianna is not the only one who can ask questions. Everybody can. So if you have other questions for Jess, and say hi, because that's how we know you're here. And then I have more questions for you, but how have you noticed that comedy has changed over the years?
That's a great question. I notice it changing. It's so interesting. It happens so much faster, I think sometimes, like, especially because I'll show the same clip of either stand-up or a sketch. Actually watch from like month to month just to watch the reactions change. And I would say that we're actually just coming from such a deeper place in terms of what we want from our comedy. I think we want it to be at a higher level. And I think that we want character-driven comedy. We want to feel like there's an authenticity behind the comedians that we're watching, that we're like, oh, this is something really special about this one person and they're sharing something with me and I'm relating to that. In the characters that we're watching, I think we're so excited just to watch characters that we love and that are joyful to be playing. And then when they're going through hard things, we're relating to them and we're coming through with them. So specifically, I would say like not as much snark, not as much like sarcasm. I think that
you actually can't get away with making fun of people as much as you could, for sure.
No, and we probably never should have been able.
Right.
But
for sure.
Now we especially see it, and we're like, no. I think that there's also a tendency in improvisation. The very first lesson that we normally teach is like group mind, right? So everyone coming together and agreeing. And the most recent thing that I've noticed, even in my classes, is to say like, hey, we're putting together a diverse group of people. It's actually not so that you all think the same way, right? So if you're someone who sees something, like, let's play with that. And so to bring your whole self and to know that your job is to support the ensemble just the way you always were, but your individual voice matters. And so to keep bringing more of yourself to the work rather than
To not have this public persona. Sorry, I just cut you off. Finish.
No, just that, right? Of like,
yeah.
oh, this is what we all think is funny, so this is what's funny. Now it's really like, oh, what do I bring to this room, and how can I bring my best self? And if I see something that I want to talk about or an issue that's on my mind, that's my job to bring that up, rather than being like, well, no one else is talking about it, so I won't talk about it. So I think that's the biggest thing.
That's actually interesting, because that's a change in society right now, just with marketing and things like that. People are looking to their company. Who would have thought you would friend? I would not, but some people will friend their mayonnaise on Facebook. Do you know what I mean? Like, people want to know what the company and what they're buying, what it's about. So you almost can't get away with having a shield. It's the idea. It used to be the business. You had your personal and your professional. You're just a person. Like, I don't think you can have those separate identities anymore.
I agree. And I think there's this whole group of people that are perfectionists and that have like built a very successful life of doing everything the right way, who are now coming to improv being like, there's something missing. Why I'm saying all the right, the right way, I'm presenting the right way. And it's like, this spark of authenticity that we want from the interaction that we have.
So did you find one of the continuums when you look at cultural differences are societies that are more individualistic and societies that are more pluralistic or group oriented? Have you noticed that when you go to different countries? I think in the US, sometimes, people think you probably struggle with people who want to be the funniest or who always want to because we're so individualistic. How does that work in other countries? Do you see a difference based on if the society is more? I'm going to spit this question out. I would be terrible in improv.
No. Look. I love it. No.
So the idea of individualism versus more group focus, how does that make a difference in terms of maybe how they act in improv or performing?
So I would actually say that yes. And no one's ever asked me that before. So I'm also like digesting what you just said. I think that it's true. And I would say that in a lot of places, especially when I've gone in as a representative of Second City, one of the biggest things that the community, that the institution emphasizes a lot in the classes that then we go into is group work, right? Is the idea of collaboration. So I think that is actually something that I've gone in specifically with the goal of teaching people. So especially when we go to Amman, they're like, we really want this group of performers. It's really important. They are all the funniest people. And it's really important that when they come together, they can create something really special together. And I've also been in other places where they're like, we all agree on everything all the time. So how can I support my individual voice? So I think that that's something, I don't know.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that I'm sure that there are cultural reasons in front of it, but it's also been interesting that happens at like an institutional level. That I've been to the comedy group that I worked with in Beirut. They were really known. The owners came in and they were like, listen, we have this great group of comedians and we don't market anyone individually. We market it as a night of comedy at our establishment. And so when I walked in, they were all supporting each other and they were all so excited to work together. And I was like, oh, that's something that these leaders really chose to do, which was really, really special. I felt really lucky to see that play out, that I believe that even bigger than like that cultural mentality is that if you can bring that the work of improvisation and the work of collaboration can kind of build that community, even if the society at large doesn't believe it, which I think is why people come to improv and then they're like, I don't know, I took a class and I stayed for 15 years. Now I live here. That there's something bigger about that work that draws people together who really want to work together and really want to hold each other up.
That example that you just gave is a classic example. Now it's so clear to me, doing a Second City or doing a corporate training, that would make so much sense in terms of how teams can work together. So,
yeah. I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned in my teaching was that it's never the idea. So often people are like, is this a good idea or a bad idea? I'm like, if you have the right tools, you can turn any idea into a good idea. And so building a team that understands that we have the power to make anything a good idea is just one of the most exciting things that you can do for a group. And I think that's why people from any aspect of life will be like, should I take an improv class? I'm like, yes. You will walk away with something a little more than you thought so.
I think it actually just taps into your creativity as well. The other thing you said, a lesson for life that I learned in my improv class with Jess was when in doubt, trust your partner. So if you feel like your mind is blank, you said trust your partner. And I told Jess the story before I came on, but the night that I was on stage, it was just so much fun because I'd been on earlier and you said, you're not supposed to be funny. You're just answering questions. So they have material. So I followed you for that. But then I didn't expect, they called me back on stage at the end. And I had this 1 minute where I had just blacked out. You know, like your mind wanders literally for a second. And all of a sudden the entire cast is like, Deanna, come on stage. I was like, oh my God, I don't know what the skit's about. I don't know what they're doing. And I just took a breath and Jess was in my head and she goes, when in doubt, just look at your partner. And so I looked at the person across me in the eyes and I just listened in the moment. And you totally saved me. It was great.
I think it's as like people fall into their own head and it's like, well, I'm gone. I've lost it. I'm just like cycling through ideas right now.
Right. And you're just going, I'll come up with a good one. No, you can't in improv. You gotta go.
Yes. And to know that like looking outward instead of like falling apart on the inside is just one of the biggest gifts. Yeah. And I think that actually works in every aspect of life as well. Whenever I feel lost, I'm like, look around. You have everything you need. Right?
That is great advice.
Yeah.
Or that's the idea of helping others. Like if you are not sure what to do, just pick the one thing you can do that will serve someone else for sure. Yeah. So for anyone watching live, again, you can ask questions live. We're sort of winding down, although I had like 100 questions, so I could just keep talking. Can you imagine it'll be a 10-hour show with Jess? I did want to know, you had talked about one of your international teaching experiences was in a refugee camp. Did I get that right? What happened there and what was that about?
One of my really good friends, actually, that I had met in the director's lab in New York, her name's Rafika, and she was one of the people that as soon as she walked in, I was like, you're incredible. How can I work with you? And she was putting together a show called Europeana, and it was with 80 students. Some from the richest schools in Athens, some from the poorest schools in Athens, some unaccompanied minors who were at a camp in Athens. And then there were also this whole group that came from Bristol. And the goal was to get all of these children to create theater together. And so I was like, how can I come? And she was like, actually, yes, will you come and teach comedy?
So cool.
And so I got to work. And the workshop was just incredible to have all of these different people in the room. There were 3 different translators. I was they were like, you're the only American here. And it was a joy. And my workshop kept getting pushed back. Things just kept happening. And they were like, will you start right now? And I was like, oh, yes, I will. And it was just the most powerful experience to get to watch all of these people come together who had been together throughout the days doing different workshops, but to just watch the power of improv, have them playing together in a different way than they had been playing before. It was really, truly one of the most special moments. So thank you to Rafika, who made it all possible.
Well, and that's the power of also just staying in touch with people that you meet, like the whole idea of networking and not being afraid to reach out to someone that you've met in another context and say, hey, it's really, people feel vulnerable when you do it because basically you're calling and going, I really like you. I want to work with you. And I think people get afraid to do that, but it sounds like that works for you every time.
Yeah, it's amazing. I like to hear from you, and I was like, yes, like that's such a joyful honor. I think I have to constantly remind myself of that too. I think one of the big lessons I learned from traveling was just hospitality. People have taken care of me in ways and ordered food for me and gotten me on transportation and helped me carry all my ridiculous luggage. I'm learning how to be a better packer. But yeah, that idea that we all, my mom's always a really big advocate actually of like we all have different things to give, and we all have those things to give at different times. So I think one lesson that has been important for me is that to help when people have something to give, to take it and to be really grateful that someone has something that they can give me. And then also to recognize those times when I can offer something in return.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of not think of like giving or taking as just a one-way street, but to constantly be like, well, how can I give back? And sometimes to think that your own presence can be giving
Mm-hmm.
something that people needed. It was amazing how many times I would message a group and I was like, do you need this thing I can give you? Do you want to learn how to improvise and turn that into sketches? And people would be like, I was just talking about this the other day with someone. Thank you so much for contacting me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was a really great lesson just about the universe and not being afraid to put yourself out there.
Mm-hmm. What I love about that as well is that idea of sometimes we always think of all the things we can't do, but just to think all the things we can do is a great way to approach the world too.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you two more things. I know we're extending, but I was just curious. And now, especially when you talked about in the refugee or teaching in Athens, where you had people from different classes within society. I also know, I'm just wondering if there's a parallel because you also traveled around different neighborhoods in Chicago teaching with the open tables, the Read Your Resident Artist. Yeah. And I'm just wondering what you found, because Chicago's neighborhoods are so diverse and really change when you go from neighborhood to neighborhood, particularly economically, racially, ethnically. So were there parallels that you saw going into different neighborhoods that maybe you weren't as familiar with?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite examples is always that we would do this workshop that was about food, and kids would write about their favorite food, and just to write the huge differences in what people were eating and how people would write, how these like young, because it was a very young workshop, right? So it's like elementary schoolers who are writing about their favorite foods, and just to see the difference there. And then to also realize like the universe, so the topics are different, right? So we would go to these schools all over Chicago and have, in ReadThenWrite, we would have students write their memoirs. And so
Nice.
That the biggest, no matter what the story is, the goal is always to help that child love to tell their story. So there was one girl who was writing about finding this stray cat. And I was like, this seems really impressive, like important to you. And she had this cat, and then her mom was like, you can't keep the cat. And I was like, well, why did this mean so much? And she was like, you know, if you're lost and someone can take care of you. And it was like, oh yeah, she found this thing that she could like love and nurture. And it wasn't just a story about finding a cat. It was about connection. And that other person who wrote about a roller coaster, it was like, oh yeah, that was like the big trip that family took, was to ride these roller coasters. And so to realize no matter what story someone had to tell, when they bring you their story, there's something special in that story already. It's not about finding the right topic. It's about being like, well, why do you want to tell me this one? Sure, let's bring more of yourself to the story you want to tell, rather than jumping through hoops trying for you to tell the story I want you to tell. So that was the biggest thing, was not to fight what people want to tell you, to go with whatever people are already telling you.
That's actually interesting. And Brianna says the idea of giving in that way is so empowering. So it's the idea of you giving of yourself. But what I'm also hearing you say too is listening to the story. Like, again, not coming in with what the content should be, but listening to what it is that the person wants to talk about. Yeah. So any other final questions from anyone who's listening, please ask. Jess, I know by coincidence, so Jamil Corey is my guest on November 18th from Silk Road Theater Company.
Oh gosh,
I know. Yeah, and I know you've directed a production for them, which I'm assuming was not funny, or was it funny? I mean, they do. Tell me about that project and about Silk Road. Like, the work they do is really phenomenal.
Yeah, Silk Road was just one of my favorite experiences as a director. Hi. Yeah, it was My American Cousin and an actress and writer, Jamila Shilo, contacted me, and she was like, listen, I'm an improviser and I'm a sketch comedian. And she's Palestinian. Her family's from the South Side. And she's like, I have this show that I'm going to do at Silk Road Rising. Will you help me? And it was one of the most transformative shows that I've gotten to work on. So the show is about the tradition of an arranged marriage and using sketch comedy to talk about what it's like to be an American with a Palestinian heritage and what that's like, and bringing light and making accessible this idea that so many people, I would tell people I was doing a show about the tradition of arranged marriages, and people would
it's a comedy.
Yeah, and it's a comedy, and like it kind of has a positive thing, and they were like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
So it was such a gift to be able to work with her and to make it funny, to be able to, and that's my favorite thing as I keep going forward, that's my favorite thing to do, is take something that people don't understand or that immediately makes us like, no, I won't talk about it. I already made up my mind. And to use comedy to laugh at it and to let Jamila as an actress showcase who she was and talk about her family and talk about her experience was really incredible. And then Jamila actually just did this workshop with me when we went back to Amman virtually a couple of weeks ago. It was really exciting to like just build those connections with someone and be like, oh, I think this is a lasting collaboration.
Oh, that's great. And so you just did a remote workshop in Amman?
Yeah, we were supposed to go to Amman in the end of March. So right as everything shut down, we were like, do you think we'll go? I don't know if we'll go. And then it was like, nope, no one's going anywhere. So we kept postponing. And finally they were like, we can't wait anymore. Can we do this? We're going to do it on Zoom with translators. Everyone is going to be in different places. And it was really, you know, every time you do it, you're like, I don't know, I hope this works. And it worked perfectly. It was incredible to meet all those comedians and to have them come in from all over Jordan.
That is fantastic. Well, just thank you so much. This was just so much fun. And again, I was so excited to talk to you. One, because I just finally wanted to tell you that was like 2 years ago when I did your improv workshop. And I had wanted to tell you, and of course I wanted to share it publicly. That was my best night ever, was my night going up on stage at the Second City. And as I'm leaving, everyone's like, Deanna, like a star. So that it was just so much fun. I wanted to share that with you because the way that you taught, what I knew was that the way that you taught was so incredibly precise, and yet it was so precise to do something that was so freeing. You add a layer of culture. I'm like, oh, I got to know how she's doing it. So
this is a joy and a pleasure. You are incredible at what you do. And I can't wait to watch you next week. I can't wait to watch the two of you together next week.
Yeah, no, he's on November 18th. So I've got a tiny bit of time before him. But yes, I will send you the link because that theater company is amazing. That's the Silk Road Theater Company. Jamil Khoury will be on in November. If people want to get in touch with Jess, you can follow her on Instagram and and take a look for your upcoming courses and things like that. So thank you so much. I am so grateful to you. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. This was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.